This is Revelations.Unveiled. Detroit. Super Predators of Hate, Part 2. Dylan Roof was a regular commenter on the Daily Stormer before murdering 9 African Americans at a Bible study in Charleston in 2015. I did what I thought would make the biggest wave, he wrote from jail. And now the fate of our race is in the hands of my brothers who continue to live freely. Roof has become a cult figure among white supremacists, especially those who espouse racial violence. He was invoked by a gunman who massacred 51 Muslims in Church Christ, New Zealand in March, with the aim of sparking racial conflict worldwide. A month later, another shooter attacked a synagogue in San Diego, killing 1 worshiper after posting a manifesto on 8chan, alluding to a race war. If this revolution doesn't happen soon, he wrote, we won't have the numbers to win it. Jackson, who declined to be interviewed for this story, also idolized Roof before emulating him. Yet, the idea of race war could not have been more alien to his upbringing. His transformation from Quaker school choir boy to self-described Nazi would shock his liberal family, from whom he had hidden his hate. But a trove of emails, text messages, web searches, and other documents obtained by the Washington Post show his descent was far from sudden. Instead, he struggled with racist thoughts and violent impulses for most of his life before sinking into an online world of white supremacist propaganda, where his personal obsessions were sharpened to a lethal edge. Not your typical white supremacist. A wicker wreath in the shape of a peace sign adorned the front door of the Jackson home in the suburbs of north of Baltimore. When a reporter knocked on the fall day, a peace sign swung back to reveal eyes the same shape and shade of blue as Jackson's. 2 years after her son's crime, Pat Jackson said it was still too painful to talk about. But the 60-year-old couldn't help herself, turning off the soft rock emanating from the kitchen to tell her visitor that, although she would never excuse the evil her son had done, his case was more complex than people realized. He's not your typical white supremacist, she said. Harris, as everyone called him, was the second of 3 boys born into an affluent family. His consultant father and teacher turned homemaker mother kept a Barack Obama hope magnet on the refrigerator. He would later tell police his grandfather had helped desegregate schools in Shreveport, Louisiana. Jackson struggled with dyslexia and attention deficit disorder as a child, so his parents sent him to middle school at Genesee, a private academy for bright students who learn differently. Years later, after his arrest, Jackson would claim he was sexually abused by an employee at the school. Baltimore County Police investigated the accusation when it came up during Jackson's court case, according to Detective Sergeant Mo Greenberg. He could not comment on his outcome, but said and stressed the difficulty of investigating decades-old allegations and their lasting impacts on victims. It becomes this monkey on their backs as they struggle with all their lives. They grow into some very damaged people. A school spokesperson declined to comment. It was at Genesee that Jackson began to struggle with depression and dark thoughts, according to a suicide note written in 2013, when Jackson was in his mid-20s. The 7,000-word document was recovered by authorities from his computer. At a very young age, I picked out a dog for my family, he wrote in the note. I spent the next several years loving her and occasionally torturing her by getting her to run very fast and then yanking the collar in the opposite direction. Extremely, violently putting her in huge pain, nearly breaking her neck on several occasions. Soon, he began thinking about hurting people too. His violent impulses were fueled by a love of history, especially World War II. I discovered the Nazis whom I felt a strong kinship with, for what seemed like obvious reasons in retrospect, he wrote, especially the promise of absolute naked power. In the fall of 2003, the 15-year-old began attending the elite Friends School of Baltimore, where his older brother had gone. The shady 34-acre campus shared the same values as his parents: diversity, tolerance, and pacifism. 6 months after the U.S. invasion of Iraq, "War is not the answer" banners hung from the school's stone buildings. At the heart of campus stood a peace pole emblazoned with the phrase, "May peace prevail on earth," in a dozen languages. There were few signs at Friends that Jackson harbored any hatred, according to interviews with a dozen classmates, teachers, and administrators. Most agreed to talk about Jackson only if they would not be identified, because they did not want to be connected with his crime. Although he was reserved, Jackson was on the edge of the popular crowd at Friends, attending parties where he drank and smoked marijuana, according to one of his closest friends at the time. He sang baritone in the choir, performed in a couple of theatrical productions, and played on the golf team, though he rarely showed up at practice. His approach to class was similarly nonchalant, earning him B's and C's. Ghani Rains, who taught Jackson history, said he never detected racism in his pupil, though the educator was the embodiment of everything Jackson would eventually try to destroy. "I was a black man married to a white woman with mixed-race children," he said. "I would sometimes bring my infant daughter to school. If he was mired in this hatred, then he must have hated me. And yet I have no idea." One classmate of color said she too had no inkling that Jackson was racist. Instead, they bonded over their love of history. "I felt like he was the only one in the class who got me," she said. Jackson belonged to a small group of more conservative students who stood out on campus. It was a really liberal school, so people shared a lot of assumptions, she said. He liked to challenge those. Friends prided itself on diversity, and groups such as the Black Student Union were active on campus. One year, Harris's friends proposed creating a white students union. There were other kinds of unions at Friends, but there was no white union. the close friend recalled, adding to the idea was a joke. Several other incidents around the time added to tensions on campus. However, the anti-war banners were torn down. A swastika appeared in the boys' bathroom. The same Nazi symbol was even scrawled on the peace pole. A close friend who is Jewish said he had nothing to do with the swastikas and doubted Jackson did either. I think he came to Cedar or Passover with me one year at my family's house. He said, adding that Jackson had Black and Hispanic friends at school and dated an Asian girl. But other classmates remember Jackson differently. His senior year, he was one of about 30 Latin students to travel to Italy during spring break. As the group toured Roman ruins, Jackson turned to a student he barely knew and said that his grandfather had admitted on his deathbed to being in the SS. He always liked to say his grandfather fought for the Nazis, added another classmate. It was his claim to fame, except his family said it wasn't true. Both of his grandfathers served in the U.S. Army.